Greetings to our listeners and my fellow panel speakers. Ransomware is a very straightforward topic, really, and yet it is so contested, even among cybersecurity folks. Most of the disconnect takes place when discussing when a company needs to focus to prevent ransomware from taking place. There are those that focus on pure technology play and others that take a wider perspective and focus on policy and governance. And the truth of the matter is it would really take strengths from both areas to minimize exposure. The critical thing to keep in mind is that hackers are extremely sophisticated and will use ever-evolving means for gaining access to your environment. It is therefore very important to consider all possible entry points and place solutions that make sense for your business and your environment. My next topic is on understanding the total attack surface. And I know Dort sort of briefly mentioned that this is a very pivotal point in that security leaders can choose to fortify a slice of the total space. So they can choose to fortify a slice of the total space or take a step back and understand the bigger picture, make a well-informed and effective decision that will both now and in the long term be worth its weight in gold. It's very important to recognize that due to ever-evolving and enabling technologies and an incredibly technical and distributed workforce, we have a frighteningly increasing potential for a breach to take place. I don't want to go fear-mongering here, so I want to state that it's only fearful for leaders that choose to bury their head in the sand and do nothing about it. For those that play a more proactive role, please step back and understand your environment. Get a very clear definition of your current baseline, know where all the possible attack vectors could be, do a thorough review of those threat tenants, people policies, technologies. Broken down even further, this means review all the various digital and logical entry points, physical entry points. How well informed, truly informed are your personnel? I don't mean those that are in the trenches only. I actually mean your executives too, specifically the executives. How well do you know the security level of your third parties and vendors? And I know Dort did a lot of talk around the supply chain. It is so important. Do you have contracts and SLAs in place giving you the right to audit them, mandating that they report breaches to you in a given amount of time? So to secure leadership, I will say first and foremost, step back and get a very good picture of the total attack surface and the current maturity level of protections you have for your attack surface. This can be done by performing a risk assessment, sometimes a gap analysis. This exercise, it will give you your current baseline. It will also give you a chance to down the pike report to leadership on growth and return on investment in a very granular way as you execute your remediation plans and identified weaknesses. Throughout the presentation, you will note a gradually progressing blue button from red to green at the tab at the bottom section of my slides. I'm sure almost all our esteemed listeners have either one or two security certificates or have undertaken some security course or training. The oft repeated, and I must admit by now cheesy phrase we have all seen is that we should implement only those security solutions that are commensurate with the value of the data that is being protected, right? Cheesy or not, this is very true. In order to determine how well you want to protect the data, you first need to know what type of data you have, what business purpose and value it has, and where it lives. This also implies that you need to know and understand what the total type of underlying applications and systems are required to transmit, process, and store each of these data types. And exactly what do I mean anyway when I say data type? Every organization processes several kinds of information. Some information, such as company website, your location, what you do as a firm, could be classified as public data. This kind of information is therefore publicly accessible and does not require identification and authentication or any type for anyone to access it. Still, other types of information, however, say, for example, if you are in the business of producing custom type for which you are the sole developer or creator, it is very important for you to save all the related information for that product behind well-fortified, multi-layered control mechanisms. This type of data can be considered proprietary or secret, depending on what industry you're in. The people who have the right to access the data in the system it sits on are considered privileged users and should undergo scrupulous authentication process each time they log in. Then there are several reference terms used for other types of categories. It's typically based on the industry you're in. For example, US government labels extremely sensitive information as confidential. The health sector calls their extremely sensitive data, which is patient data, personally identifiable information, or PII. Their classification system can just dub this type of data as sensitive or call it out in their classification scheme as PII. Which type of labeling moniker you use is not important, but that you do use one and adhere to the classification scheme you have elected for the organization. This is a very important step. Leadership needs to understand that it does not make sense to protect every data type and system to the same level. If you do, you'll either end up being needlessly costly or, worse, abandon all attempts because it's too much. The knowledge of what you have and where it lives is powerful and moves you a significant amount to the right on the maturity scale. The knowledge gained from this experience will be extremely relevant and impactful as you remediate and close your gap findings from assessments performed. This area is probably the most exciting space for security techs and engineers. The list of acronyms you see on this slide are only a fraction of what is available for consideration. What is important is that all your systems and data are identified and classified per scheme discussed earlier. It is therefore a much simpler process now to understand what protection controls, systems, and data should be given, what processes and procedures need to be followed. Once implemented, it's very important to remain abreast of the continuous patches and updates required for the tools in your environment. At this stage, we have a rigorous defense in-depth strategy for protection against ransomware. You've done your risk assessment and understand your weaknesses. You've prioritized and remediated your findings, identified all critical apps and data, fortified attack surfaces, and implemented the appropriate tools and technologies. Still, we need to prepare for a day when some entity does manage to get through all this. You need to have a very well-developed incident response plan, one that identifies all threats, defines recovery procedures, identifies roles, communication plans, routinely tested procedures. Your plan should be both enterprise in scope, frankly, and also have built-out sections for business units. Your plan should consider all possible threats, incident breach types, frankly, recognize the danger to the organization should that ransom be executed. The strength of your recovery and response process will be a testament to all protection and detection steps undertaken in the prior slides we went through. Okay, so now we have all the pieces in place, logically, physically. We now look at your personnel. Do you have the right security folks in place? Or are you repurposing staff from other departments? Whether you hire directly or get consultants or take the managed security service path, please make sure you have the right folks to manage all these critical areas we are talking about. You need senior level understanding and buy-in to do this. Still on the same topic of people, it will take all hands on deck to float your ship. All personnel, whatever department they're in, whatever level in the organization structure, it is absolutely imperative that all take security courses that is relevant to their level, one that clearly outlines the various ways in which ransomware can impact the organization and therefore themselves. It is the responsibility of each employee to remain abreast of this requirement. It is the responsibility of the organization to make sure training programs are mandatory and are continuously updated to reflect the fast evolving threat landscape and technology growth. It is also the responsibility of the organization to develop material that does not put personnel to sleep. Joking, or maybe not. Possibly, surely it's worth considering to make the maturity lively and interactive. Govern, govern, govern. For every investment you make, please make sure you have the capability to monitor, track findings, remediate, and manage what you have implemented responsibly and accountably. And what does this mean anyway? This means that leadership understands and empowers you to do what you have to do. You need to put policies in place, back them up by processes and procedures. You need to have the right budget, the KPIs, the metrics, so you can measure progress being made. You need to hold yourself accountable to an industry standard and regulation. This prevents you from implementing or building solutions in an ad hoc fashion. Governance measures should cover your own environment as well as the entire supply chain. Remember what Dart said earlier on. The supply chain is very much part of this. I can't stress the importance of keeping a firm pulse check on your entire supply chain. Otherwise, every protective measure you take against ransomware is a matter of when it takes place and not if. This step, implementing a governance model, finally tips the maturity level for your preparedness against ransomware into full green status. This concludes my session. I've greatly enjoyed our time here. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn should you have any questions. Santi, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mali. We'll move on now to Anya, who has great insights on this topic.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It is exciting time. I'm trying to do something different in regards to the ransomware, and I'm going to cover some of the topics that usually are not covered, and maybe some of the creative ideas that I want us to start thinking about in regards to the ransomware. So first question that I want to answer is in regards to the zero trust model. Zero trust model is the model that is being used a lot. And actually, I'm quite critical of this model. So why is that? Because zero trust is the idea of trusting no one, no device, no application, no human. It is also requires authentication and authorizing absolutely everyone, independent of where they are, what device they have. And as many companies transition to cloud environment and managed service providers and allow work from home and using personal devices for work, the problem only gets worse. My main criticism of this model is that it is unrealistic and practically impossible. Zero trust is not aligned to the agility and the ability to collaborate that businesses actually want and need today. In fact, my view on the zero trust model that is very dated and it is an artifact of the past. So in cybersecurity circles, especially devoted to zero trust, there is a tendency to focus on finding the weakest link, which as humans, we tend to blame the humans. So it ended up being a person who didn't make their password strong enough, or the person who believed in phishing email, clicked on malicious link. We spend lots of time educating users, trying to force them to use the password that is complicated, that has to be changed every 3 months. But actually research shows that when users are forced to use such passwords, they're finding the ways of circumventing that and actually using the passwords that are easier to guess. Although it is, as cybersecurity professionals, it actually makes us feel good and superior to say that the human is the weakest link, is actually not only doesn't solve the problem, it is also not true. Recent research actually shows that humans are the ones that might be the strongest link in the chain, and software might be the weakest link that we tend to ignore. So just think about the zero-day vulnerabilities that are being found and exploited recently. I think the problem here is that we are tolerating software that has bugs at the core, that is being pushed to the market without the security in mind first. Another problem with this approach is that it clashes with the perceived business needs of the companies. To protect every device and every application takes a great amount of time and resources, which companies either do not have or they prefer to use those times and resources for generating more revenue, for example, or beating the competition in a race to market or growth. So what are the solutions? The solution, unfortunately, has been a cyber insurance. And what I want to talk about is that cyber insurance is the greatest blessing for the companies and the single greatest curse that actually perpetuates the existence of the modern ransomware model. So what you see on this slide is the recent headline. The headline is about the rapper. His name is Lil Uzi. He's a great artist, very successful. We actually didn't want to put an image of the diamond here because we didn't want to infringe on any copyright rights, but you can look it on the Instagram. The diamond is very big, very beautiful. Lil Uzi is very into diamond, and he purchased this diamond that cost $24 million. And of course, what is the point of having the diamond if you cannot show it off? So that's what he did. He implanted it in his forehead, so it was the piercing. And not only he did that, he actually talked about it at large on the social media. He even explained how the diamond is secured to the forehead, what holds it together. His security advised him against such a display, but it is only human, first of all, to trust. He trusted his fans, and then it is only human to want to shine, to want to show your diamonds, what you have, right? Unfortunately, his fans like the diamond even more, and it was ripped out of his forehead during the concert. So why am I telling this story? What I really want to talk about is not even the diamond, but about the psychological perception and how this perception shapes the modern ransomware landscape. We talk a lot about protection, about business continuity plan, endpoints, etc., but we rarely talk about the psychological aspects of the ransomware business and the victimology of the ransomware. I think it is important to do that, as there are lots of parallels that we can draw between this story and what is happening now in the United States and Europe in regards to the ransomware. We're going to come back to this, but for now, I want to ask you all a question. Did you know that Russian hackers, who, by the way, control the lion's share of modern ransomware business, give interviews from time to time? They actually do. And I think we should pay attention to what our adversaries are saying, because it gives an amazing insight into how they tick and what perception they have of their victims and what there is to come in the future. So I'm going to share some of the insights from the recent interview with one of the ransomware actors called Lockbit, and we can have a discussion. So actually, I want to have an open discussion about it. So one of the questions that was asked to the interview during the interview with this Lockbit is why 2021 became such a headache for all the companies, and they've been just attacked by the ransomware constantly. Why we didn't see it in the years prior to that. And I'm going to quote you some of the answers from the actors. So what they say is that big money attracts more and more people in this business. At the same time, the risks are growing. So the larger the company's revenue, the better for us. There are no decisive factors. If there is a goal, then it needs to be worked on. The location of the target doesn't matter. We attack everyone who comes to hand, and there is no time or desire to prepare for an attack on a specific target. Our priority sector for attack is business capitalists. So that's what they say, right? Let's get back to the diamond story. Obviously, you can't advertise a multi-million diamond on your forehead and not get noticed or cause a wide variety of emotional, including envy from your audience, right? I just want to point out that this is not meant as any sort of judgment, but as a simple fact. It is very, very human behavior. Big companies often advertise their success on social media. They include new acquisitions, new systems that they purchase, their shiny diamonds, they want them on display. The perception of large multi-million-dollar company from the viewpoint of an attacker is actually because the biggest fans that it is a nice, juicy target. And as I'm quoting them directly, big money attracts. The larger the company's revenue, the better. So all you need to know is that ransomware actors are, in fact, your biggest fans. By the way, Another thing that ransomware operators said, and I'm going to quote it here, companies do not want to spend money on protecting the corporate network and hiring highly paid specialists. And secondly, any protection can be bypassed. Another thing they said is, we didn't feel the pressure of the security forces. The pressure of the security forces can be felt only when they have already come to you with the warrant and jumped into your window. It is impossible to put pressure on us with other methods. The non-friendly relations of the West are beneficial for us. It allows us to conduct such an aggressive business and feel calm being in the countries of the former USSR. So this is very loaded here, right? Let's think about it for a moment. Regardless of if you agree or disagree with this statement, those are the perceptions of your adversaries. So they do shed light on the situation from their viewpoint. Where if an adversary steals an actual rare diamond, you probably know that chances of them being caught are quite high because they probably wouldn't be able to sell it discreetly. And the law enforcement is going to be on the tail pretty quickly. In ransomware business, there is an unfortunate factor that the payment of ransom is being made in virtually untraceable cryptocurrency, and the countries do not share common policy on dealing with cyber criminals. So the cyber criminals feels very safe and secure. Again, when you have crown jewels that you want everyone to see, read it as simple psychological fact that people will always neglect security in favor of usability and ease of use. When there is no real way to hold thieves accountable, the next best thing from the viewpoint of the corporations is insurance that will help to pay the ransom. Insurance, it is a very controversial subject. And when the hackers behind Lockbit were asked if laws against ransom would potentially affect the business, they answered that there will be no laws that prohibit companies from paying a ransom. Information is often strategically important. Having lost data to encryption, this means loss for a company or at least the leading position in the market. This will cause serious damage to the country's economy, and the authorities will not take such a drastic step. Again, we want to take it with a grain of salt, right? I want you to pay attention to the fact that they did not answer the question. If we learned anything from the Colonial Pipeline attack, is that when the stakes are high and the issue becomes government concern versus private business, ransomware actors do feel the consequences. Case in point, if you didn't know that, after the Colonial Pipeline backlash, the ransomware affiliate business was prohibited from recruiting and posting advertisement on illicit forums that we at Flashpoint monitor, and it was prohibited by the ransomware actors themselves. Why? Because they didn't want to get in trouble with their own government. So it is possible to influence the ransomware landscape, and maybe not as difficult as we used to believe. As Lockbit actors put it, a high-profile attack is bad, and the low-profile attack is not. It is better for the ransomware actors to have a low-profile attack that is not publicly advertised from the monetary perspective. Just to summarize, what we learned from looking at things from the attacker's perspective is that they realize that in current reality, it is easier and cheaper for companies to rely on insurance and to pay the ransom than to hire and retain experts in order to secure all possible points of entry. I invite you to look at cybersecurity from a different perspective. First and foremost, I encourage companies invest in cyber intelligence and investigate possibility of the unified policy on ransom payments and cryptocurrency. This is not about having backups anymore. Since data is a commodity, data theft and exposure are real problems that we're facing now. And it is important to make data theft for cyber criminals a less attractive and more risky business than it is now. It's not all doom and gloom, and I want to look at some of the ways that we can improve our cybersecurity approach. And there are 3 points that I want to emphasize. First, when we're talking about cybersecurity, we need to assume that people will neglect their own security if it makes a system easier to use. So we need to work with the systems versus trying to force the users into an unnatural behavior. Again, to protect people's security, we need to protect it by system and integration design and not by telling the user what to do. Because telling user what to do haven't succeeded so far. And we tried. Then build security into an interactive systems and make it invisible to people wherever possible. All of the above and the overhaul of how we think about security, realizing that traditional approach did not work and intelligence-based security is a more flexible approach, might be better. So we should just think that maybe we should change our approach. Since we talked about zero trust, about protecting our resources, but the more sophisticated we become, more sophisticated hackers become as well. So we do need to think on the psychological aspect of the situation as well. So now I want to end my speech here with just some of the creative ways that maybe would get your creative juices flowing. One of the questions that we've been asked a lot is it true that you can protect yourself from ransomware by installing Cyrillic keyboard? So, of course, it's too good to be true. It is a myth. But as any myth, it is based on actuality. And if you have a desire, you can actually create the certain settings that will give you a high level of protection against modern ransomware. And I was successful to set an app system like that. System can be set up to mimic the systems of countries that ransomware originated in the countries of former USSR does not want to attack. Setting up the system in this way would include changing the defaults and preferred locations of the system, keyboard layout and preference, and also calendar time and layout. Of course, the system should be configured through system preferences and VPN solutions to do that. However, in the current climate, it is likely impractical for mass deploy, and it is not user-friendly because it has to be done manually. But it is something to think about that maybe some systems can be set up that would, without input from a user, could mimic the systems. Of course, many ransomware actors steal the data prior to deploying the ransomware itself. So even with this system set up, the data must still be at risk, and we should consider different factors.